Hello everybody and welcome. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are gathered here tonight on Biripi land, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who are here with us tonight or watching on the live stream. My name is Stacey Morgan and I grew up in Wauchope, and I've been home for the past 12 years in my role as principal at Port Macquarie Performing Arts, so I'm very invested in our local area. And of course we are here tonight to talk about how incredible our community is and to celebrate some of the awesome people that we have here who really stood up in a time of crisis. But before we begin, let's start by taking a bit of a walk down memory lane and watching a video that will really remind us of why we're here tonight.
My name is Dr. Clare Allen, CEO of Port Macquarie Hastings Council. When we went out and we talked to people around the floods, we said we need to share this story. We need to come together. We need to let other people know what happened. Now already we're counting the cost. The financial cost at this point in time is $70 million over the next 2 years. But let's not think about the financial cost. The emotional cost will go on for years to come. This community has gone through so much. It's actually gone through drought, and it's gone through fires, and it's gone through the floods. And everywhere we went, we heard the same stories. We heard people say, we got the text message too late. We were told to evacuate too late. We were finding ourselves trapped, and we didn't know if anybody was going to come and help us. And so we decided that as a council, we would let other people share in these stories so it can become part of our history. And so I give you a warm welcome this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire, for being here, and thank you and welcome also to our Mayor, Peta Pinson. We're so honoured to have you here and honoured for the opportunity to talk with the community. And of course, we are here tonight to talk to three incredible leaders in our community, but of course, everybody in the audience watching at home and here at the Glasshouse would all have 4 or 5 names of people that we could bring up when thinking about people who really stood up in this time of crisis. So a big shout out to those people who aren't with us tonight, but that know that they played a special part in the recovery, a special part in the event itself, and are still playing an ongoing part as we move away from the actual disaster itself. It's incredibly important for me to acknowledge that we don't have the opportunity to have everybody on stage, but we are so honoured to have 3 incredible people with us here. So can we give a big cheer at home and here for our 3 incredible guests? We have Phillip Morton, we have Olivia Tape, and we have Jeanette McCoubrie.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start by doing a little bit of an introduction for you guys to the people watching at home and also the people here as well. Olivia, would you like to start by introducing yourself and talking a little bit about the role that you played as part of this event?
Sure. Okay, so I am just an ordinary person. I'm a single mum. I've lived in Port Macquarie for about 2.5 years. I work from home and also studying a degree. I started the Port Macquarie Mud Army, so I was inspired by a few things that happened over those first few days, and I started a cute little spreadsheet of there was people putting their hands up that wanted to help but didn't know how. So I started a spreadsheet and of volunteers and with their names, details, and how they wanted or could help. And I had planned on passing it on to whoever was going to coordinate the response. And I ended up coordinating it myself. Started the Facebook page, and it went from 38 to about 400-500 in a couple of days, and it's around about 1,400. And that's a mix of volunteers, people who need help, and just curious people, I guess.
Incredible that you stepped in and filled that need between people who wanted help and people who were willing to help. Really, really awesome. Can we give Olivia a big round of applause?
Absolutely.
And Phil, you, I've been told, are the unofficial mayor of Rollins Plains. We're so grateful that you're here. And of course, you've had a lot of flood experience. Talk to us about your involvement this time around and your role in the community.
Look, what you said earlier on, there should be another 20 people here in front of me, so thank you for having me, and I will do my best to convey their thoughts. But yes, I have had some flood experience. I mean, back in the 68 flood, my family was down the Maria River, and that was, I believe, was the 1 in 100 year flood they told us at that time. And this one that's come along now was just like a tsunami compared with that. Down the Maria River, we got warning from upstream. We got a telephone call from a farmer up on Scotts Plains Road, gave us about 8 hours warning. When the tide came in, the river gently flooded out and flooded our property, but we'd had the time to take our cattle and machinery and etc. up onto a hill next door. So very little damage done, no fences flattened. But this flood came just like a tsunami and ripped the guts out of Rollins Plains, if you'll excuse my language. And it hit Telegraph Point and did the same thing to Telegraph Point. Went down through the Maria River. Instead of coming out through the Hastings, which was already full, it went north, east, up through Crescent Head and drowned cattle and caused just absolute havoc. So the sad thing for me was the fact that I had sat on my veranda and seen the flood coming up and couldn't ring and let anybody know.
A really hard position to be in as well.
Absolutely.
I love to hear, though, that the community was rallying around, that people were calling in and saying it's coming, and you had that moment to be able to get everything up onto the hill. In
the 68 flood, that was correct, but in this flood, I don't know of any of the farmers up the river. There was cattle washed up Rollins Plains off farms, and the good news is some of those cattle turned up on properties further down and they were saved. But for the people downriver, where we had 8 to 10 hours warning in the 68 flood, I think that this water came that quick. And you imagine there's 40 inches of water we had in a couple of days up there, that it just went down the river, it ripped the trees, it just destroyed everything in its way and took cattle and houses and just destroyed people's houses. And the good news is there've been so many wonderful people like this lady here who came and helped our community. And we've had donations of food and all sorts of wonderful things happening. The disappointing thing is the people with the money, Telstra, and our telephone companies still haven't turned up.
Wow.
So is that because you said that you couldn't ring downstream, and is that because the phone towers were out?
The phone towers were out. All their mobiles, Optus and Telstra were out. But worse still, that all their landlines were out too.
Of course, yeah.
Now the landlines in the 68 flood, when we were down the Maria River, the water covered all those landlines and they still worked. We had an old phone, all the neighbours were on the same phone system, ring it 123, 123. Everybody in the district probably listened in and found out the flood was coming anyway. But this one we had no landline, no mobiles, the whole thing was out. Disgraceful.
Yeah, I misunderstood what you meant. I thought that this time round you got the warning, but this time round there was no warning.
Absolutely
and
not.
no way of reaching everybody else.
We're in a position to give the warning because we'd got it
Yes.
when I was a young fella. Couldn't get it, no phones.
Really, really difficult.
Sad.
We'll talk about it a little bit more later, but I'd like to give Jeanette an opportunity to introduce herself, coming from the Camden Haven region.
I'm from the other side of the floods, I suppose. So I've been a Camden Haven resident for 14 years. We moved up from Victoria. So when the flood started to happen, being a Dunbogan resident, our business was actually in the flooded area. And my husband and I could see from our experience through the fires that we were not ready for what was about to happen, and that this was not something that would just be there for a couple of days and then go down. The aftermath of the floods was going to be something that the community support needed to be around. So with a few of us put our heads together and decided we would sort of do a local flood help Facebook, very similar to what Olivia's done. And so we helped coordinate that there, and we had so many people just immediately get up off the ground. Phil Burko, one of the locals, got a whole bunch of other young guys together, and they were out there. There was just people coming from everywhere. And so I was sort of part of that, doing a similar thing, from coordinating to realising people needed washing. People were coming on, how can I help? Can you connect with this person, do their washing, take it away? And so we just connected. There would have been at least 50 people that were connected for washing alone. And teams just moving from different areas. So I sort of ended up, ad hocly coordinating, thinking someone will turn up soon to take over my role, and then I'll just go here. And so 10 weeks later, I'm still full-time, helping people. One of the saddest things with floods is that we don't get the same visibility that we do with other disasters. So when we drive down the streets in Dunbogan at the moment, everything looks wonderful. And if I was here on holidays, I would have absolutely no idea what's going on. But in my volunteer role, I'm getting the privilege of being allowed into these people's houses. And in many cases, it's just devastating. Yeah. And the help is around. There's a lot of roadblocks that we're trying to overcome. But where we start working together as a team, where some of these amazing volunteer groups like the Samaritan's Purse, like the Baptist Church, like the Uniting Church, where we all start moving together, St Agnes, when we see these teams getting together, the joy you get out of actually being able to see someone who's devastated and then to be able to get them back into their home is just amazing. And that's 99% volunteers, which is just, we live in an amazing community, and I'm sure most small communities like ours are doing the same thing in their own rights. It's a privilege to be part of, really.
Yeah.
I guess what's incredible hearing your stories is that you were in this situation where you wanted to be able to help and you weren't quite sure where to go and you were waiting for somebody to step in, but you ended up being the people that stepped in. Talk to us about some of the stories that you heard, some of the experiences that you had. You were knocking door to door, you're going into people's homes, you're seeing things that are coming in and out, and the real human stories that are going along with that. What are some of the stories that have stuck with you?
I was a bit, once everything we got roads again, which we must thank the council for. They did a fantastic thing of getting our bridges open so we get our power back on, which was so important to the community. And I was able to show Peter and Clare around the valley and different other people, and the devastation of the valley, a bit like you said, a few days, a week after it, you could see it, but you can't see so much there now. But the wonderful story I was talking about yesterday is he spent $100,000 repairing his property. Do you know what he did yesterday? He was across the road helping a neighbour put up a fence. And he's got 2 other properties he's still got to spend probably the same money on. So there's some wonderful, wonderful people out there. And we've seen Essential Energy following when you guys got our roads back in action. We've seen the Mud Army and all these wonderful people who came along into our community. Blaze Aid. It was just an absolute delight to see and be able to help these people in some small way. way to get them into our community and try and let the public know through the various media streams, because we need help. All our communities need help. So I'd love to thank all the people who've helped, and they might have donated something small or something big. Regardless, thank them. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Awesome. Olivia, is there anything that stands out in your mind?
I tend to come back often to Riverside Village. Riverside Village is somewhere, it's along Hastings River Drive, it's somewhere that's become really, I'm quite emotionally attached to it. The reason I started Mud Army was because of a gentleman. During the floods and the day after sort of the waters peaked, there was a Facebook post about a missing person, and his name was Gary, and he had no family here. His family, closest family, were in Newcastle. The roads were all closed, so they couldn't come, and so they just needed a welfare check done. So I said, oh, look, I'm more than happy. I'll drive over to the evacuation centre, see if I can find him. They sent me a photo of him. They couldn't tell me if he'd been there or if he was there at the time. So I just did the walk around, went to SES headquarters. And long story short, I met Gary a couple of days later back in his home at Riverside. He had been in floodwaters for 16 hours up to his chest. When I met him, he had still like bandages where the covered like wounds where the furniture had hit him. And he was in his late 80s, but he's just one of the most resilient people I've ever met. You know, he was sitting on his veranda, and he had a little bit of a laugh, and we were trying to organise people to get all the stuff out of his house. And I said, oh, would you like to go through some of your stuff? And he's like, oh, no, it's all done, love, you know, just get rid of it. And so I had to like climbed over furniture to try and find his briefcase because he had everything in paper still. And I plan on going to call in later this week to see him, but there's lots of people at the Riverside Village who are just absolutely beautiful people, yet vulnerable and just deserve so much help and so much love. And so I'd like to sort of try and keep bringing the focus back, because like as you said, there's still so many people that need help, and it is so easy to look around and think that everything's okay again. You know, you go down Settlement Point Road, and because, you know, that was one of the first places to receive the help because it's beautiful, and you want to get the place looking nice again so tourists want to come back, and, you know, it's so multifaceted, the response. But, yeah, I completely agree. I think that there's still lots of people that can use our help.
That's something I hadn't thought about before, not in terms of the isolation. It wasn't just people being isolated by floodwaters because they couldn't move, but that isolation of being alone in that moment.
Yeah.
So your people that were stepping up and going door to door and reaching out to people, just to break that isolation for them must have been so important.
Yeah.
So important.
And especially people who live alone. So we're finding when you're going around to these houses where it is your responsibility to get your house back. When you've got a partner or a family or other people within your household, you've got someone to cry to and someone to say, help me. Yeah. But when you're on your own and you stand there, one of the ladies I went into her house in the early stages is one of the most resilient ladies I know, and she was stood there frozen. She doesn't even remember these couple of days. She didn't know what to do. And, you know, part of the local flood help, we got people in, young kids like these 16, 15-year-olds stepping up and coming in and helping. And as you slowly chipped away at a room for her, then she could sort of go, okay, I'm not in this alone. And they start to uncover. And, you know, for me, one of my favourite times in this whole thing, which is unusual to have a favourite time in such a tragedy, but was when I heard a lady I've been working with for 8 weeks on the phone, and I didn't recognise her voice because she was happy. Oh. And it was just, and that was because we'd helped her son get back into his house. Sorry, it's quite emotional, but hearing that like this is 10 weeks into the thing, and to hear someone's voice for the first time in a different light, which is actually happy, and to have, you know, an amazing group like the Anglican Church who have donated so much money. You know, when we asked this family, because they've had other crises, what can we do? And they said, get my son back into his house. The Anglican Church stood up, the Samaritan's Purse stood up, and in 2 weeks we've been able to turn that whole thing around. And that boy will go in on the 7th of June into his home, which is just an amazing thing. But what we all need to realise is there's a lot of people who we didn't do that for that still need to do that. You can open a door and it looks like a construction site, that they have nothing. So wherever we can, we, you know, reach out to other people in the community. There is still lots of volunteering that needs to be done. If you can paint, put your hand up, we need you. If you can do someone's, you know, the Mud Army were talking about gardening, like helping people with that. You know, go on to Give It, pay $5 or $10, because that money literally, like Give It helped with this house as well. We rang and said, you know, we desperately need this, and they're like, yep, absolutely, this will get someone in their home, we'll do it. So, you know, Give It has given tens of thousands of dollars into Dumbogan alone. So not forgetting that those places exist is really, not forgetting that you still can volunteer. It doesn't matter who you are. Like, look one of us up, find us on Facebook. We will find a role for you. If you can bake, if you can, you know, trim a tree, if you can do anything, there is a role for absolutely everyone in this. And if we can just, you know, take 2 or 3 weeks breath, that's fine, get on with your own lives. But if you've got a week or a couple of days, put your hand back up. You're needed. Yeah, I think that message is hard to keep telling you when we look so perfectly. And when you meet someone down the street, how you're going, yep, great, thanks, great, you know. And I do it myself, yeah, all good. And then you go home and go, oh, that was a horrible day. Like, you know, are we going to get through this? And then you realise that you are. And then someone rings up with a smile on their face and you know, this is worth it. Yeah, so.
Absolutely, a really important message. I hope that there's lots of people at home that are watching that are saying, well, yes, actually, I can lend a hand and I do have a day or two. It'd be really valuable. Claire, I'd like to turn to you now in terms of the council's role in an event like that. What is the council's role? How do they step up and how can we work together?
Absolutely. So as soon as we get the notification that there's going to be a flood, the Emergency Operations Centre steps up, and that's the State Emergency Services. Council arrives at the same time, so our staff arrive at the same time. We're there to assist the emergency services, so we're not there to actually run the event. And that's important for people to understand. So we step in. And we're there in terms of sending our crews out onto the road, making sure that we can clear things. But the State Emergency Services, they're really in the operational command. So they start to get out to the communities, and there's basically messages coming from everywhere. So those of us that are there, we say, well, okay, there's an emergency at this area. The mayor was down at Laurelton. She was saying, I've got 50 people here. They've just left with nothing. They've left basically, you know, their accommodation. They've got just the clothes on their back. And we're saying, how do we get some relief to them, some support to them? So we start stepping in and the staff start coordinating some of that support. But one of the things we recognise right from the beginning is that recovery doesn't take a focus. Emergency services takes a focus, but really right from the moment that they leave their homes, they need that recovery support. So they go into the evacuation centres. We basically will do things like, oh, there's nowhere for you to have showers, we'll open up the pool for you. So we basically drop everything. In terms of just if you think about waste, the thing that happened for me is I get a phone call to say there's a kilometre long of people, and even though it's just the day after the floods, they want to just put their rubbish somewhere, right? And so it's like, absolutely, just let them come in, just let them drop their rubbish off. We need to clear this. Because in our minds is, if that stays there, the smell is just going to get really massive. So that's part of what we do in terms of trying to get that waste removal, trying to get out there. But we also have to do assessments. And, you know, how do you get out and do assessments when there's still all of the floods and they're raging and people are isolated? yes, they receded in certain areas, but in other areas, it took 2 weeks before we could even get there. So you've got people that are quite isolated. So again, you've got helicopters, and we're saying, is it safe for them to get in there? Is it safe to drop off food? Then we have Combine, and it's like, there's no water, there's no fresh water. How are we going to get fresh water to people? So then we've got to sort out teams of people to get in, and that means that the logistics and the coordination are quite big. So council every step of the way says, well, let's have a think about how we can work through this. And so that recovery process for us is really important. And our staff step up and do an amazing job in terms of getting all the other services to the plate. So then we do the community meetings, community forums, we go out and speak to people, we hear what people have to say. Quite often they think the whole role is council, but it actually isn't. We just play a part in that recovery. And all we can do is then take those concerns. So as a CEO, I would then go through to Resilience New South Wales, raise the concerns from the community forums, try and get them in terms of government and politicians, and try and get some action quickly. And I really believe that the action the council took really pushed people and politicians to get the ADF in quickly, to get other services in. People don't realise, but with Disaster Relief Australia, we have to invite them into our community. So council invites them in, and then they come into the community. So there's a lot of back-end things we do to offer that level of support.
And how was it for you, having not been in your role for very long, to kind of hit the ground running and then have to drop everything and then step in for this disaster?
It's an honour to serve the community. So to arrive and to be part of such a major disaster for this community is an honour, but really it blends into insignificance when I looked at the amount of heroes across our community. I think every single community I went to speak to people, I had a tear in my eye, but the main thing was because people were saying, we thought somebody was going to come and help us, and they didn't, and we had to jump in ourselves and do it. And you just saw all of these champions, like these people here, stepping up. And to me, that was just, wow, all I can do is serve and do the very best I can. It's not to say that all of us weren't tired. I'm sure everybody here was tired. We kept going. It was one of those things where everybody just had to say, let's just push on as much as we possibly can.
Thank you. And now, to the Mayor, I'd like to ask you, you were in amongst it all. What do you think that was done really well, and what do you think are the areas that we really need to focus on in order to be better prepared in the future?
Thank you, Stacey. Firstly, I'd like to say heroes don't wear capes. They're everyday community members. And Olivia, Phil, Jeanette, sitting with us tonight, these are examples of what our community looks like. Everyday people doing extraordinary things for our community. I would say what was done extraordinarily well was our community responded before anyone. Our community had each other's backs because we were waiting to be rescued. And for some people, that rescuing didn't come off the back of some of our state emergency services or fire and rescue, not because they weren't here to help us logistically. We didn't have the boots on the ground for the significance of the crisis we were facing. But people like Tunny and his tinny, young boys in their tinnies, people who had tinnies came from everywhere. People rose up. They stood in crisis with each other, which just, I guess for me, it just reinforced the goodness of humanity, the goodness of being a part of a community, and the worst of times really does, Stacey, bring out the best of people. And I saw that, and I saw people come out who were frail and could do nothing but turn up with a basket of muffins and cry because they couldn't physically help. And they needed to be consoled to say, it's okay, you don't realise you're feeding actually people who do have the physical ability to help. So you're actually nurturing your community by doing this. The heartbreaking thing was seeing people's lives going out onto the footpaths. Things that people treasured, possessions that had been handed to them or that they had just come along the way throughout their life and collected. And to see that taken from them.
And that those choices were left up to other people to decide what was important. That was really
100%.
heartbreaking.
It was heartbreaking. What did we do well as a council? We stood up. It was a time of crisis and we stood up. And I am so proud of the council that I represent because it's not lip service, it's what happened. I know I was on the ground, but I was also behind the closed doors seeing the decisions Claire and her staff were making. And nothing was refused. It was, our community needs this is what we will do. What could be done better? I think governments need to really step up in times of crisis with community. And we don't need everybody at the time it's happening. We need them after. Yeah. We need them now. Yes. We need the ADF to come back. We need Disaster Relief Australia to come back. We need heavy lifting still to be done. I spent some time with Disaster Relief Australia out in Papenborough, and people on the land are proud. Yet even they have had their spirits crushed by this flood. It was so powerful, you're right, Phil, it ripped through our landscape. No one has seen anything like this. And the devastation it left behind has really knocked the wind out of people who have seen bushfires, droughts. We're talking about people who live off their land and carve out a life from it. And to have their fences taken from them again, which is a farmer's best friend. They contain their livestock with their fences. So when Disaster Relief Australia went to paddocks, the relief of people just so they could contain their stock and get some sort of normality back. And that's the stock they could save because as we know, Stacey, a lot of cattle drowned in this flood. And we're talking, you know, very precious assets to farmers. So what could we have done better? I think we were in a situation that no one had seen before, and hats off to our community because the resilience they showed and coping through such a crisis has just been inspiring.
And that pride that you would have felt both professionally and personally going through that experience was really evident. Claire, I bring the same question to you. From your perspective, what was done really well and where can we step up to make sure that we're better prepared in the future?
Look, the State Emergency Services did an amazing job, but the data let them down. The communications let people down. There was black spots in different areas. There's been communities complaining about black spots for decades, and here we are in this massive crisis. You can imagine a hall which has got the internet, but they can't get to the hall. Their phone doesn't work because they've got no phone coverage, and they're completely isolated, and there's no way out, and there's no support and no help. So there's got to be some support to those people, and really the telco companies need to do something about that. They need to be able to put in that emergency response, and on top of that, we need to do those emergency plans. So there's someone in every community that's going to step up and they're going to be a champion. They're going to take that level of support to other people. So we need equipment. If it's a defibrillator, if it's access to things. We saw people have heart attacks, right? I mean, it's stressful. So we need to be able to equip those really isolated communities. And I don't think that we've done that really well. We did the fires, we did other things, we went out to those communities, but now we've actually got to give them the resources. We can't kind of let months go by. We've got to do something right now. Absolutely.
We have a question that's been submitted by Judith Hodges, who is in the audience. So thank you so much, Judith. The question is, where is one central place that we can all connect to when it's obvious that a crisis is imminent? How does information spread from there and who to, so that we can all know what's going on? And how do we connect with each other to make sure that we can get help and give help?
It's a really difficult question, and the reason for that is that we have the evacuation set up. So we give people information in terms of getting to evacuation centres. But every community, or most communities, have a hall. So we tried to tell people to get to those halls. In this instance, we were saying to people, there's minor flood alerts. And then we were saying, basically, get out. And by the time we said it was get out, it was too late, right? So I guess what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have that level of communication across for everybody, as I said earlier, because the reality is that there isn't one central place, unless, of course, you're in the Camden Haven and you can get to an evacuation centre, or you can get to Panthers in Port Macquarie. But if you're in Telegraph Point, or you're in Pappenbarrow, or you're out of those areas, it's not easy. In terms of communications, if your phone network is down, then how are you going to get the information out? How are you going to get your internet information out? So again, there is no answer on that. The emergency planning should help. I really like Phil's idea in terms of having the old phones and being able to connect with people, and it sounds like it worked a lot better than what it did for us. So there's something to be said in terms of that connected technology, whether it's even walkie-talkies to help people to get them to those central points. But again, it's about going to those communities and say, try and get to your local hall, or use our evacuation centres in a time of need.
And now a question for everybody. In terms of the recovery, which we've spoken about, where are the gaps at the moment that need filling in the areas that you're familiar with? And are there ways that people who are watching here or watching at home can really step up and help fill those gaps?
I think what Peter said, I think the council did fantastic jobs getting our roads open. There's some roads that need a little bit more work in future. We had some people isolated for 6 days. So the council did a fantastic job, which allowed the electricity company, in which I've already said. But we're not getting out in the bush. We didn't get it after our bushfires. We didn't get the help from the volunteers, and there's lots of wonderful volunteers. We had the Mud Army at Rollins Plains, I think, for 2 or 3 weeks. And we've had the Blaze Aid in there for 4 weeks, and they've helped a lot of people. But there's a lot more work to be done, and we aren't accessing those volunteers out there now.
The calls for help have stopped too. I think a lot of people think that because the waters have receded and because, you know, things look normal, that these support networks aren't there, and they still are, you know. I haven't had the messages for help from people, just 99% less, you know, and because I went from posting every day and saying, you know, who needs help, where do you need help, and perhaps it's, sorry, said I'd do that. Perhaps it's back on me as well, asking.
I think the people have got the stage where pride or whatever, they're just not asking like they should. And we've got to try and get around our community out in the bush and try and identify people, because I ask people, are you ready with Blaze Aid, etc., etc. And, oh no, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. So it's a bit frustrating.
And because a lot of the waiting for Blaze Aid is just hands on the ground clearing fences, am I right?
Yeah, and then you're having the material to put the fences back up again, and being able to afford to buy the material to put the fences up again. Like I said, we spoke to 2 farmers yesterday. There's a $70,000 grant from the government, but they've already spent $100,000 and they haven't got to their fences even yet.
Oh, even applying for that grant. I spoke to one of the farmers out that way, and he was just beside himself with, because, you know, not an overly technical person, so navigating those channels and knowing who to ask for help. How do you even start with trying to do that? How do you then get on the phone for hours and sit there on hold? You know, like, I think empowering people to know where to go for the help, because it was there, you know, the hub did an amazing job, you know, that resource was incredible, but I think a lot of people didn't even know it was there. And not only did they not know it was there, which there was flyers, and I'm certainly not criticising how the information got there, but they still didn't know. And I don't know whether we, you know, if there was a bushfire, we've got contingency plans, we've got pamphlets that go out, you know. We train people, we educate them on what happens in a fire, what should you do. And perhaps we need to look at doing that a little bit more for the floods and for those other times of crisis, so that it's not so unfamiliar on how to get the help.
I absolutely.
It comes down to communication. And
yes, it
I
does.
think throughout the floods we've seen that. It is a difficult thing because even within Dumbogan, where we have good coverage, we had no power for 4 weeks. For 4 days. And some people even had longer, and that was telephones as well as just general power in the houses. So they weren't getting the messages. And so the importance of the volunteers on the ground were that they were delivering that message and they were telling people to go into the hub, which was the message that was coming out. But in saying that, no one had vehicles. So that was another hurdle of saying, well, these people want to get into the hub, but they can't. And I think working with people like our MP, like Leslie Williams, in 2 hours got buses, and 2 days later on the Wednesday, we had buses there for 4 weeks. But in future, it would be good to have that before we have to ask for it, if that makes sense. But that's the learnings, right, that we can get from this. And getting, there was a lot of people in the hub saying, come to the hub, where are the people? And we were having to literally knock on the door and say, there's this centre where you can go now, this is what you need to do here, and then knocking on the next day and saying, did you get there, do you need a ride there? Handing out, when the bus timetable came, it's like, well, now we have to give them the bus timetable, and they're saying, yeah, we're posting it at the bus stops. It's like, no. So, working through those processes and using our network. So I think, we found the Samaritan's Purse in someone's house. I didn't know who they were, and, harnessed them and said, right, guys, we love you. What you can do is really helpful. But, that communication of knowing who all those people are, knowing who the DRA is, which I met at a meeting we had on that Sunday beforehand, and then going, oh, wow, you turn up in a disaster. Like, most of us haven't been through a disaster, so we don't understand what these groups of people, and it was really sluggish in finding out what they did and what they do. From a call point of view, you said the calls are slowing down, which is great to hear in a way. I'm finding it's not from where we are, but it's a lot of people who are in that limbo waiting for their disaster relief grant if they're low income. So in the meantime, their houses can't really be touched. So they're sort of sitting there in this limbo, in this housing crisis that we've got, and is only going to get bigger because a lot of these people are staying with someone or staying with a friend, or thinking that, in 3 months after the floods I'll be back in my home, and it's 11 weeks, and they're no sooner closer to it.
My biggest concern is the health of our community, and there are the forgotten ones, the people that have actually gone back into their homes that we don't know about, that are living with mould in their walls, and that'll cause respiratory problems. But not only that, it's the 1st of June, winter's upon us now. I really worry. I worry for their warmth. I worry for their health. I also worry for our new homeless. We already in the Port Macquarie Hastings had a society of homeless, and we have a new wave of homelessness now as a result of the floods. And it's not even that some of these people can seek refuge in their cars, because we have to remember cars were written off. And many cars are staying where they were parked. For the lucky ones, there was insurance. For others, it's
a lot that there wasn't.
It's a long road to recovery. And when you think about our senior population, which in the southern region of the Port Macquarie Hastings area is predominantly in the North Haven, Laurelton, Dumbogan area, it was the hardest hit. And I worry, I really worry for these people.
Insured, as much as we call them the lucky ones, a lot of them, they won't go back into the houses for 6 to 12 months either. So they are also in limbo. A lot of them haven't even heard whether they're getting their money yet. Some are finding out today. I got a call from someone who thought that their insurance was going to go through and have just found out they're not. Other ones have just found out, yes, I'm getting it, but we're telling you it's going to be 12 months before we can get your house repaired, because the builders that we use, in Dumbogan alone, 221 properties. So you imagine the builders trying to do that, or the insurance companies trying to do that. So for the few lucky ones that were insured, it's good, but it's still, there's a lot of mental health issues involved in there. So yeah, we're definitely seeing that mental health. There is some great things that Resilience are doing, and we can see them coming on the ground a lot more, and St Agnes. So a lot of those forgotten people, you know, there are people that are door knocking, and there are people making sure that they're okay. So we will continue to see that, but we definitely need more of that. And we need solutions to tell these people as well. You know, as the outreach centres close, it's like, okay, where are they going? And if we don't get that communication right when we close those doors of outreach centres in the future, there will still be, for the next 12 months, people that need to know, where do I go for this if I can't go to where I've been told that's your place. So I think it's really important to work with Resilience and to work with Council to work out what that looks like moving forward, and that we're very, very clear with the message that we give to people that we have not gone, that we are still here, that it might look slightly different, but this is your next step. Because that guidance and that hope is what's keeping people from tipping over the edge from a mental health point of view. And so, you know, where we can continue to give them a plan and to give them a hope and a road forward that they will be back in their house, I think we need that to be as smooth as we possibly can.
Absolutely. We're quickly running out of time, but I wanted to say on behalf of the community, thank you all for the role that you played in standing up in this time of crisis. It's been really wonderful to be able to sit and hear your stories tonight and hear from your perspective. And I think it's important as well for us to think as a community about what we can do now and how we can step up next. To those people who are still affected and who we can help now because they're still in a time of crisis, that's important. But it's also important as well that we do everything that we can to make sure that we are better protected for when the next crisis comes as well. I had many questions to ask from people who submitted questions before tonight, and so I do apologise for not getting to all of them. But if you have a question that perhaps you would like an answer to, we would really love it if you would get interactive and join the conversation. There is a flood survey that will take you only 5 minutes that you can access on the Port Macquarie Hastings Council website. And if you're watching at home live, then it'll be in the comments and it will be pinned to the top of your comments so that you can just jump on straight now, click on it and go straight to there. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I will leave it to our Mayor Peta Pinson to close.
And thank you, Stacey. And I'm going to close with something really special. This was sent today, and actually from your hometown, Phil.
Thanks, Patty. Yep.
And the author at this stage is unknown, but I'm sure when I start to read this poem, written by a local community member, they'll know who they are. It's called Flood Rain. In the 90 years I've been, said old Bill the farmer, I've never seen a flood before that caused this sort of drama. The weather's hard to follow or harder to explain. Creeks were running flooded, then it started into rain. Old Bill said, fair dinkum storms, where lightning slice and slash, clouds overfilled with water can sometimes fall and crash. If you bottled up the Wilson from Telly Point to Rollins Plains, tipped it out on Tinnybark Mountain, you'd have gully raking rains. That's partly what happened in Port Friday afternoon. No doubt a cloud had ruptured and it caused its own monsoon. Street runoff couldn't take it, the low parts were to fill, all the way from Coolumbong to the base of Fernbank Hill. Port was in the grip of flood with the Hastings on its way, and a few they felt like Noah when it happened in his day. There were conflict warnings from folks they didn't know, but the old folks on the Hastings, they knew what was in tow. Old Bill said one mighty storm he remembered plain, washed away his best dog he'd owned from off the chain. The old ones will remember, they'll not likely to forget, milking cows and swimming stock and a fortnight working wet. I once lived on the Wilson that heads in mountains vast. There's been ripper floods before from up there in the past. One in 1929 said, was topped in 68. What will be this aftermath? What shall be the Wilson's fate? I live now upon the Hastings on its banks down here in town, and I just know the Wilson will be punching her share down. News is scant from up the plains with amenities ripped out, power wires draped in river oaks and a bridge or two in doubt, cattle washing off the flats, who knows if they'll swim out? Some may make it home, but the rest will be in doubt. Tides may wash one on the shore, a debit in some farmer's purse. Maybe knows he's still lucky, that it could have been far worse. The swollen river will recede. He will fix his roads and fences, dry his coat, shrug his shoulders, accept again his flood expenses. We may live in modern times and accept its luxuries, but remember, it's still nature in the end that turns the keys. I'd like to say thank you to the author, and that is just a small snippet of what we've experienced, and it is Mother Nature who determines, but it is the community who decides how we stand in a time of crisis. Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to encourage everybody, if you can, especially at home, to donate to Give It, because of course we've seen how incredible the work that they are doing. We've seen the incredible work they're doing. And if you can donate at home and or here while you're here in the audience, and thank you so much to everybody who's joined us tonight, that would really, really go a long way. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us here tonight as well.
Thanks for having us.